I wanted to talk about Business Insider. So there was a story just in the past couple of days about Business Insider laying off a very, very large number of people, laid off 21% of its staff. And I know, Chris, whenever you're traveling, and you and I have the same conversations with publishers all the time, which is how much should we downsize? How much should we keep? What should we keep? What bits do we do? How do we make this happen? So I want to lay out a little bit about what's happened with Business Insider and tell a little bit of the history. But then what I'm interested in is that I have a very optimistic view for the future of media in the post Google future. What I see is an opportunity where we can do cool things. And it seems totally antithetical to me that you'd be laying off staff at this moment. Of all moments, this would be the moment you'd be going harder. I suspect you have a different opinion. So that's what I wanted to discuss. But if you don't mind, I'm just going to set the scene first.
Sure.
So Business Insider, now just Insider, laid off 21% of its staff as part of a restructuring effort, and it's blaming financial challenges and the need to streamline operations to focus on their core businesses. Okay. Now, as I said, we're only 70 days away, or less than 70 days away now, from the breakup of Google, which is designed to mend the discovery, distribution, and monetization of news content. So it felt to me, when the minute I saw this, that seemed odd. So I decided to do some research. And the Insider CEO, a lady called Barbara Peng, who I'm sure is a fantastic CEO, I've got no criticism of the company, I'm just interested in their motivation, was that she told staff there was uncertainty about the future of their business, given that 70% of their traffic was reliant on search. And that was looking shaky and unreliable given AI overviews and other AI challenges. All right. So that's all very interesting. But then there's a little bit of history to Business Insider because I actually didn't realize they were quite this large. So it started in 2007 by the US media analyst Henry Blodgett, grew to be a major publisher, okay, got to an audience of 325 million people in the US and around the world. About 68% of it was on desktop, and it had nearly 10,000 staff. So, I mean, we're talking about a major media company.
Big deal,
right?
yeah.
It was then sold to Axel Springer, the German publisher, in 2015 for $343 million US, which is $100 million more than Jeff Bezos paid for the Washington Post. So it must have been considered to be something really serious. Its revenue peaked about 2 years ago at $290 million, with the majority of its revenue coming from search traffic monetized through premium programmatic advertising, except it had done what many other media companies were too slow to do. It pretty much did from the beginning. Had a very strong subscription business because obviously Blodgett came from the analyst side.
Yep.
It had business intelligence, which was a unit with its own staff, which charged very, very high subscriptions for access to in-depth reports, insights and analysis on all kinds of stuff from crypto to e-commerce, AI and blockchain. It also had a really successful newsletter business. It's never really broken down where all that money went, but that felt like you had spread bet all of your, or hedged all of your risk. And now here we are in the dying days of Google and the potential wake up of a new media industry, and it's laying off 21% of its people. Why?
Discuss. So let's try some other things then about so obviously we know it got bought by Axel Springer. Axel Springer, a very large German publisher.
Very dynamic, imaginative.
Very dynamic. Yep, very dynamic. Has a guy at the head of it called Matthias Dörfner. If you ever met him, he's about 6'8".
He is absolutely enormous.
yeah. A
huge
big
guy.
Big German alpha male. And Springer had bought kind of Business Insider really as a way of getting into America. So they bought kind of business intelligence. They bought Business Insider. I think they bought Politico as well, and it was generally their kind of their expansion kind of plans to get out of Germany. Still a very strong business in Germany. Still have kind of the biggest tabloid in Germany and the equivalent of the kind of premium version in Germany.
Yeah, they got Bild, haven't they?
Yeah, they got Bild. Yeah, which is
so one of
their
senior
son
execs.
of Germany. Yeah,
yeah. One of their senior execs signed up for my newsletter this week, so I actually mentioned it. Yeah,
there you go. Guten Morgen, if she's also a fan of this podcast. So they went into America. And Business Insider has always been. It was originally, kind of, as you say, came out of business, but it was quite kind of mainstream business. So it wasn't the FT. it wasn't the journal, which sometimes have been sort of earnest in terms of their business coverage. And as you know, American business journalism can be quite kind of earnest in the way that it thinks about everything. So Business Insider was slightly different. What they have done over the last few years is they've done things I would say for the Business Insider probably maybe didn't need to do. They've expanded into a lot of different areas. They expanded into lifestyle coverage. Um, One of the bits that Springer owns is AWin, which is an affiliate platform. And Insider kind of branched out and started to do a lot of things around, trying to sell product on the inventory that it had and branching out into kind of different ad markets. Now, so there was a period of time where if you were big, you could pretty much add content areas to your sites and you would be rewarded by kind of search traffic and you could sell programmatic ads. Neither of those things really cared whether you were talking about business or not. So the way I read this announcement was one other thing to add. Back in December, they effectively broke up what was the actual Springer business at the time. And a few
Yeah, I
things
remember.
happened there, right? So firstly, they separated out the classified business and sold that off to KKR, which is private equity. And that's a big part of the business, but that went. They consolidated Axel Springer then into the series of kind of all of the journalism. I think they kept AWin in that part of the business, but all of the journalism and took it private. So that was for me a kind of right. We're now preparing. A lot of the talk about that at the time was we want to be the home of independent journalism and AI powered. And Dürfner, as you know, is very kind of he's always he's a bit of a next wave kind of
Mhm.
a CEO. So that was what they set themselves out to do. So if you think of the timing and you know how big corporate publishers work, that sale goes through in December, whole business goes into strategic review.
Yes.
Insider sits down, right? They have a big whiteboard and they say, right, what parts of the business that we're in are going to survive into the next, 5, 10 years? What is going to be able to ride AI and is protected from the impacts of AI? If we think that Google search is going to diminish or search generally is going to diminish as a source of traffic and, AI is going to grow as a source of traffic, question mark as to whether it delivers traffic or not, then we have to prepare the business for that. So I read this as a couple of bits. One is it says we're getting out of a lot of the affiliate business. That isn't
Yeah.
e-commerce is not where we need to be. We're pulling back on areas that we're publishing content. Now, what they're saying is 70% of our business is subject to volatility. Brackets, if search goes up or down, we are or we aren't profitable. What that actually says to me is 30% of the business is driven by content that's read by subscribers.
Yes,
And
I read that.
it's profitable whether the ads come in or not. So what they're doing is stripping back on all the areas where actually probably they know that their subscriber base doesn't really read the content. It's there just to kind of provide this arbitrage of, well, maybe if we get some search and sell some programmatic, we can add another buck. So
Yeah, okay.
I take it
Where
as, look, this is kind of there's probably a strapline. It's something like fit for the future. This is like, let's get lean before we really push into the other areas. And the one investment area I think for them was events, which says to me that will survive AI because face to face is going to come back. If everything's run by machines, we're still going to want to stand around, at events and conferences and talk about, with other people. So that's my slightly kind of crazy take on it.
oh, mate, I get it. I guess my question is it you've got 325 million people around the world that enjoy its journalism. And
Yeah.
it seems it's cutting back the journalism. I mean, you've got a third of a billion people. You've got the entire population of America
Mm.
wanting to read your content, and you can't make a buck on it. I mean,
Well, did you know? Did
that,
you notice the thing in the Did you see in the announcement they actually said, which is one of the things. Sometimes you read these things, you think, Christ, I've rarely seen an announcement that would say in the same place we're cutting a fifth of the staff, as well as saying we doubled revenue per page in the last year.
mm, yeah, I saw that too.
So that kind of tells you that actually that there's an awful lot of pages in that 325 million kind of reach that really don't make much money. And
No,
I suppose if I put my like corporate hard hat on, I've had many conversations with journalists over the years, who can sometimes make that sort of leap, which is given that some journalism is profitable, all journalism must be profitable. And given that some journalism is profitable, more journalism must be more profitable. And for a lot of
Yeah. All right.
businesses, that ain't necessarily true.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit. So let's see how we go. I'm putting the heater on here, mate. It's absolutely freezing in Australia.
Is it?
All right. So yeah, no, it really is. So here's the thing. I think we've been taught to believe as an industry that advertising is a bad business to be in because the yields are so terribly low. But the yields weren't always terribly low. The yields have become terribly low because news has been commoditized by Google and by programmatic to be so cheap as to be virtually worthless, unless you have Google's scale of what was it? Hang on, I'll find the number. 6.3 trillion ads a year. Yeah. Virtually any yield is a
Yeah.
good business at that volume. But most people don't have it. So even the entire population of the United States reading your website isn't enough money to make a buck and keep the lights on in a media company. That means that supply and demand is broken. The supply of content and the demand from the consumer both occur. No problem. We'll write it. They'll read it. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, except there is no dinner. Right? Everybody's starving because there's no money at the end of it. So we're going to starve the consumers of something they clearly want because there isn't a way to monetize it. And the whole point of the antitrust trials that we talk about every single week is to re-enable and re-facilitate and re-oxygenate the market away from that super, super low yield market. And the other thing I'd say, and I used to say this a lot prior to Google's acquisition of DoubleClick in 2007, I used to say to people, they used to say, no one wants to buy the news. And I said, they're not buying the news, right? They're buying the person that's reading the news, right? No one sells the washing machine to an article, you idiot, right? You sell the article, you sell the ad to the person that wants to buy a washing machine that happens to be reading the article. You need to it's not the news that's the problem, right? The problem is the yield and the facilitation of getting the ad to the person. So if you've got 325 million people, and I assume that they have rich first party data on a lot of those because now we are quite far down the line, you would think that they would have enough scale there to double, triple, quadruple their market CPM in a post programmatic future. But maybe not. Maybe I'm missing something. But
no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you missed it. So there is definitely one of the big opportunities for publishers is this change in yield if there is genuine competition in the ad tech market, and that can we know that depending on who you ask, 30 to 50 to 70% of the kind of the money is disappearing out of that supply chain between advertisers paying it and publishers kind of receiving it. So that's a massive opportunity. But if you think about that, that doesn't necessarily, let's say I've written an article which is getting good traffic. The yield problem can be fixed without adding more articles. So there's more money coming in. Business Insider becomes more profitable. Of that 325 million, I'm going to make some numbers up. Right? Of the 325 million, you're probably going to find that there is a massive long tail of people who came to Business Insider once because there's something that happened which happened to be published by them, but they're not Business Insider readers. So the sub business tends to focus on the, I've not seen a number. I don't think they publish the numbers about how many subscribers they've got.
No, I looked everywhere. I think they're kept fairly carefully hidden. Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? Because most subscription businesses cannot wait to tell you how many subscribers they've got.
Yeah, they don't tell you how many people they've got subscribed to their newsletters either.
No. Which again, it's sort of interesting. But so of that 325 million, what will be really interesting to know is how many how many is repeat, how many are genuine Business Insider kind of visitors versus kind of drive-by, fly-by traffic. So one of the things they talked about in yield is they know that business advertising has a much higher yield than e-commerce, mattress. I mean, one of the examples people use for some reason a lot about Business Insider is they started to sell inflatable mattresses. And that isn't, that's not the business they're in. And secondly, writing articles to try and sell inflatable mattresses, you ain't going to get the same yield you're going to get writing about.
Yeah, I get that. I think that was a strategic error, but I can kind of understand why they thought they could do it because at the end of the day, they've got what they describe as a healthy subscription business in doing these intelligence reports, which feels like a rich area for them. They should do that, right? Similarly, the newsletters are working, so that should be driving a certain amount of traffic. What I thought, what I thought perhaps they did strategically wrong was that they leaned very, very heavily into putting their content onto other platforms. So they became
Mm,
heavily reliant for traffic for that 325 million people on
yeah,
search and on Meta and on social. And so the companies that I am seeing pulling back, way back at the moment, are the ones that built on social. And so,
yeah,
look at what happened to BuzzFeed a few years ago. Look at what's happened with Reddit, right? And so you look at these companies, you're thinking, okay, you probably don't want to be heavily reliant on those platforms because they're
yeah.
pivoting to a new world. But I guess I, oh, it's a question. Let me turn it into a question rather than
Mm,
an opinion. Do you think there's a future for premium advertising for publishers?
yeah, yeah. I really do. I really do. But I think it's going to be where the publishers themselves have a really defined position. I think we've talked before about
Okay.
even the
Yeah.
fact that 325 million is still subscale compared to the platform. So you're not going to get, if you want scale, you know where to go. So what you
Mm.
want is what publishers have to do to get premium yield is to have premium niches, areas where they're really specialist, where they can demonstrate that they're a kind of unique proposition, and that will be in this area. That will be Business Insider saying we have, this is like anywhere you go in Business Insider, it is densely populated with CEOs, C-suite execs, visionary to the future, people with budget to spend, and that's worth higher yield. I believe there's premium. There's premium in definitely in business. There is in fashion. It has exactly the same thing. You can get very good CPMs in sort of luxury, um, which is why I feel like the FT has both the business section and how to spend it as their two. That's kind of the two places they believe they're going to be in premium. I absolutely believe that's true. I think you can be in. You can have the German businesses quite a lot have really good niches because of language. So if you're a very good German language
Yeah.
publisher or a Polish language publisher or whatever, you are protected in some way, so you can generate yield from that. I think where you won't find it is in competing in, you know, categories of content that A, not that distinctive, B, are not that linked to your particular brand, and C, can be produced by machines, to a reasonable standard.
Interesting. Okay, you've explained that very well. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that I was on a podcast this morning actually, like 12 hours ago now. It's been a long day. And they were basically saying to me, where do you think the challenge for the media is? And I said at the time that, I think we're entering a kind of dumbbell bit of business where you
Mm,
have premium publishers at this end that are really big, like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and
mm,
the real newspapers of record. The middle, which is bloated today, probably largely disappears.
yeah,
And then you have at the other end maybe hyper niche, massive niches that are very, very good. Okay,
yes,
down here, which is also a barbell, right? So you got
yeah,
big lump, and the middle gets hollowed out. And the middle's become bloated because of programmatic advertising and it's relied on volume. So
yeah.
what you're actually explaining to me here is that there is a revival of premium quality publishing for
Mm.
premium quality CBN. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So I think so. I think if you're Derfner, you look at this saying, well, what's going to survive? And that's a great question. What is not going to be able to be produced synthetically? What is not going to be able to be advertised against? Where are advertisers going to say, do you know what? I want to be associated with, and that's why having a really clear brand proposition is exactly the kind of thing that's going to keep advertising clients coming back for more. Because if you're an advertising agencies at this point, kind of, if you think we worry about the kind of the world of publishing where we produce the content and we always sort of assume that there's a whole bunch of imagery and we can probably sell it. CMOs across the world are all sat there at the moment thinking, well, like, how is this going to play out? How am I going to kind of get my brand out to audiences? In the same way that we're very worried about AI discovery and saying, well, we're not going to get any traffic back from AI, it also has a kind of deadening and flattening approach on brands. And
It does.
so
Yeah.
they have to think about how are they going to get to market? How are they going to build brands in a world where AI, which is largely kind of has to feed off content that's already been made, it's very, very difficult to build brands in a kind of AI generative search world. So that's
But
where
you're
the
not describing But you're not describing the perfect outcome for the publishing industry or the premium publishing industry, because we've argued. I mean, I don't know how many times you say it in meetings, but
Mm.
I know I did it all the time. Where I
Mm.
was arguing, if you want to build a brand, the best place to build a brand is with us, because our
Mm.
audience are dyed in the wool. They care about us. They know that if you sit with us, there's a halo effect for you and a halo effect for us. Right? We're all winners here.
Mm.
If you're trying to sell dodgy crypto run out of Belarus, right,
Yeah.
then that's your programmatic model, right? You can buy,
Yes.
your bottom of the tier. Yeah, we I always talk about it as there were two webs. There was a Walmart web and there was a Harrods web, and we didn't want
Yeah.
to play in the Walmart web. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're up here, okay,
Yes.
and so we're going to have less inventory, but we're going to be more targeted. We're going to have a better audience. We're going to have to charge a higher price. The problem was that the value of our advertising was the same as the Walmart web. And so
Yeah.
you couldn't afford to create the
Well,
good stuff. In fact, somebody actually said to me, sorry, mate.
sorry.
Somebody
Well,
said to me on a podcast about 2 weeks ago, they basically said the entire Google model was to commoditize all traffic into one flavor. So we could sell it all for the same
yeah.
price, which made it unbelievably efficient to deliver, which meant our costs were far lower and our yields, we didn't care about the yield. Our margin was baked into the price.
Yes.
Disaster if you've got to create the content. Great business model if you're
Yeah.
just the paper boy.
And so what we've struggled with, what publishers definitely have struggled with, is differentiating between, what professional content, if you want to quote it like that, sort of compared to user generated, compared to brand content, compared to anything else that was there. The opportunities are going to come around again, I think, in this differentiation between human curated content and machine content. And if a higher percentage of, if you look at what Meta sort of clearly said, that we kind of expect to be, A, we're going to make the content, B, we're going to make the ads. There'll be a machine to machine conversation, and try not to look in there. I think the opportunity for publishers to be saying, well, actually, here is a kind of, if you're going to advertise here, A, that it's human content and therefore it can be relied on. B, that we've thought about kind of the product that you're advertising in. And you aren't going to be sat alongside, as you say, the Belarusian crypto boys. So I think that is an opportunity, but to do that, it does require publishers to do a couple of things. One, they have to be really clear about the niche that they're in. And that has been quite humbling. So there has been a kind of journey the last couple of years, which is this recognition that it wasn't going to be scale. Like, we were never going to be scale. I think there was still a period where we thought if we were bigger, we would always make more money. And I think that there's a point at which you say, well, actually, no, there's a sweet spot in here, which is we could be big enough for the niche that we're in. But being any bigger after that means we have to go outside of that and publish in areas that really aren't, they're going to be the lowest possible kind of return for us. And that sweet spot is what every publisher is trying to find.
God, that's a fascinating insight. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. So I was at News Corp when we bought MySpace. I was on the board of MySpace for a couple of board meetings. And so, we bought MySpace because it was the second largest website on the internet at the time. Right?
Yep.
And we spent a fortune, absolute fortune. It was nearly my salary and bonus. I couldn't believe they spent that much money on it. And the goal was scale at all costs. Right? It was, we are going to be the dominant player in digital. Okay. Now we all know how that went. I think it was sold off to Justin Timberlake in the end for 30 million or something. We paid, I think, 460 million for it. Not me, by the way, but somebody. But that was when scale was the thing. Are you saying that you think that has the media industry been sufficiently humbled to believe that being big in a niche is enough now? Because I can tell you that when I used to run newspapers, people used to scream in my face to be 10 times as big every single minute of every single day. Do you think the industry's been sufficiently humbled now to say, actually, you know what, to be dominant in our niche is enough for now? Or do you think it's got there?
I think it has, because I think so. So if you go back to the start of when your scotch was being made 25 something years ago, right?
It's absolutely delicious, by the way.
I bet there was there was a period where where the money's coming in and you don't have to be quite as forensic. And then as we've talked about a lot in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, as the platforms have moved to a different phase and started to kind of keep more of the traffic and started to squeeze harder on the sort of anti-competitive side, as publishers, you have to become much more scientific about where actually your money's coming from. And one of the challenges for all publishers, and this is why one of the other things with Business Insider is this is a big chunk of cost that's coming out. When you take a big chunk of cost that comes out, the other thing you tend to do is it lets you rationalize your overheads. And so that's, I mean, I'll explain that very briefly, but if you think about, look at your beautiful house behind you, right? You've got heat and you've got light and you've got council taxes and you've got, all the things that basically, whether there's you or you and 50 people in that house, those costs are the same.
Yeah.
So when the challenge of cost cutting generally is you can say, well, I can cut the people, the frontline people. I can maybe cut some of the management teams, but it's quite often quite hard to cut your electricity bill. And so you end up with what's the German publishers love to call stranded overheads, which always gives you this little image of a whole bunch of costs in a lifeboat somewhere going, we don't know where to go. And what happens then is that the stranded overheads are taken out of that lifeboat and put onto the profitable parts of the business. And the reason the mid-level publishers of all the publishing types, the mid-level publishers, the ones that are actually really struggling, is because they have subscale and they have overheads. And as they cut, those overheads just move to the more profitable part of the business, and you end up in this death spiral of overheads following you to the bottom. People in your pure niche, a couple of people can produce now brilliant content in a niche. Substack is a great example of that, right? Very low overhead, very easy kind of, very few costs associated with it, and you can make a good business out of that. Big publishers get to spread their overhead across a lot of content. So, they can be profitable. It's the ones in the middle where that doesn't work. So, that's what I think happened. When you take 20% out of the headcount, you're also going to say, we're going to close a few buildings. We're going to renegotiate some of our contracts for tech. We're going to cut the licenses in the business. We're going to do all the things that actually really reduce that core cost. That's why when you say, look, I wish this had been a bit more optimistic and a bit more adventurous in terms of reinvestment, I think you do this job now, then in your next round, you're investing on top of what is a leaner business.
I like it. So what you're saying is that you're creating a nest egg for next range growth when you actually know what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a bit more optimistic. I hate the thought that, the publishing industry would be continuing to try and shrink itself to survival at the point that it's actually got some future ahead of it. What do you think happens? Changing direction slightly, what do you think happens to Substack? So I should be very open on here. So I'm a big fan of Substack. I use Substack as the baseline of my entire business, and I'm very open about. I've posted regularly. So Substack's made $700,000 this year for me as a in Australian dollars. It's not real money; it's noddy money, but it's monopoly. But that's it's about I think it's like $2 or $3 to the pound or something. And so. But it's a living wage. It pays for my family and everything. And it's not coming from subscription. It's coming from sponsorships. It's coming from public speaking. It's coming from podcasting. It's coming from consulting. And so lots and lots of different businesses flow off the side of this. What do you think happens to Substack? So it has a $600 million valuation. It has, I think somebody at Substack told me that they have, I think I'm going to get this number wrong, but I think it was 10 million credit card details sitting in there. A lot of subscription revenues changing hands. I think there are something like 100 businesses making $1 million or more. No, 10 businesses making $1 million or more. And so what do you think happens to Substack? Is it the kind of first foray into subscription newsletters, massive niches? Right. So you mentioned earlier on, they can be a mass media business insider, but if it's 325 million people you don't measure and you don't know, they're not very valuable. But if you have 325 million people in lots of newsletters with 100,000 readers each, that's very valuable. Right. Yes. So what do you think Substack or newsletters means for the future of a media company? Reach is doing this, right? In the UK, they seem to be expanding into that.
Yeah, it's an interesting move. So firstly, I see a lot of journalists kind of coming over. Is it Alan Moran, who's just come over? Who was the guy that got fired from one of the American broadcasters for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time about the wrong person.
Yeah.
We've seen sort of Jim Acosta has come over from CNN. I talked to Polly Burnham from Grazia has been able to come over and build a kind of a niche business. So, so I think it's a great example of we've always known great writers, people with an interesting point of view, people with an opinion, and people particularly I think who can talk about what might happen next. There's always going to be demand for that, and what Substack's done very well, I think, is kind of work out, how to connect people, audiences to that sort of that group of writers. I think logically, more and more people will come on the platform, and as probably will happen, the quality will vary as that happens. I think
Mm.
they've. I don't know what you think, but I think it's probably like most digital sort of products where there'll be steps in scale. As you say, there'll be 10 people that are making 1 million. There'll probably be 1 million people that are making nothing.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
10 million probably. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's okay, right? That's there'll be a lot of. I mean, I charge for the sort of articles I put up on there because at this point it's for me it's mostly to help me think.
Mm.
Um, and so I think there'll be a lot of that. I think what it's shown. I mean, I do think some of the areas. So it's got a really deep specialism, for example, in military kind of analysis, military strategy.
Hmm.
If you want to know about Ukraine and Russia, there are some amazing. I mean, it's something I'm sort of interested in. They're an amazing set of writers who
Yeah.
are probably not famous. Could walk down the street pretty quietly, but within those circles are real experts on what's happening. And I think that's the interesting thing about this platform. How it develops, I don't know what you think, but what do you think about how they're going to develop things like notes, which at the moment is almost deliberately not a social feed?
Yeah, but the temptation is to take it there. So I've actually got a really interesting first-hand experience of this. So I'm something like the 57th fastest growing news site on Substack, and I'm the 75th fastest tech, and I'm like ninth or 10th in antitrust. So the more kind of
Yeah,
fractured the niche, the more you are. But there are people who care passionately about antitrust. And so, if you're up there in that niche, that's a great place to be, as you would be on Twitter back in the day, right?
yeah,
But what's really interesting was that I've been very, very careful to try and stay in my swim lane on what I do here. There are so many opportunities to expand into US politics or
hmm
step into this over here. And if you did it, if you're a good writer and you've got
yeah,
a bit of a brain and you've got an opinion and you can make a case, then you can reach massive numbers. And so I've deliberately stayed in my swim lane, but I accidentally fell out of it once. So there was you'll remember, a New Zealand diplomat gave evidence at Congress about Meta. She was a senior executive at Meta, and she
yeah,
gave Sarah Wynne Williams, her name was, and she gave evidence, and it was in front of a Republican senator who is deeply disliked. And there were Democratic senators that were also there, and it had Mark Zuckerberg, and it had China. And so it kind of hit all the red hot triggers in America:
yeah,
Republican, Democrat, uh, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, China. I mean, come on. It was
yeah,
so I covered it I'm covering a tech company being a whistleblower from inside a tech company revealing the inner workings of a tech company. That was what I cared about. But oh my goodness me, did it hit a volcanic seam, right?
yeah.
Just suddenly, like there were 500 or 600 new subscribers a week pouring in with opinions on everything under the sun. And I was deleting comments continuously that were like, just abusive and angry. And so you got a sense of the vehemence of America. And it
hmm
wasn't coming from the right or the left, it was coming from every direction. Okay.
You'd hit the real
And
streets.
so, well, I did. And so if you have a look on the newsletter, you'll see that, my top five newsletters of all time
Mm.
probably had, a few tens of thousands of views and maybe 20 or 30 comments. This one has been shared 25,000 times.
Mm.
Okay. So if I decided that volume was my play, then I would go and write something again about that because I've now got all these people sitting in my newsletter who are clearly triggered by this. And so
Yeah.
you can trigger rage for volume,
Hmm.
right? No doubt. None of them are paying subscribers, by the way, but you can trigger rage to get to volume. So my learning from Substack and that experience was, um, I don't want to dilute my audience. I want to keep the purity of my audience. I actually feel a little bit troubled by the audience that joined, all
Mm.
because of this, because they obviously thought I was a new voice in this space. I don't want to be that voice, right? I want to
Yeah.
stick to my swim lane, doing what I do. Um, but this is the interesting thing. Substack didn't promote that. Okay. It wasn't Substack that did that. It was people sharing with their
Yeah.
audiences outside the Substack feed. Now, had it been Twitter or had it been Facebook or had it been Insta, that thing would have gone to the moon, right?
Yeah.
Because they would have seen that and spun up the algorithm to artificially inflate it to drive rage for volume.
Yeah.
But Substack didn't. So I think you're right. I think Substack is deliberately trying to keep some purity in its feeds and not go down that
Yeah.
growth hack algo model.
And I think I suppose what it does do. So the challenge of people going to be individual contributors, it has always been then distribution. So I mean, we talked a little bit about a while back about record companies and how they thought about talent.
Yeah.
And publishers traditionally had this kind of group of writers, and they would deal with the distribution, and the masthead would get discovery and bring people in, and then people would read the journalism. And so that's one model. The flip of that model is I go out as an individual, but in like a pre-Substack world, if you like. I mean, the Tumblr did this, way back, right? You still have to have a place where people can come to discover those writers, and it couldn't be search, and it ain't going to be Facebook, and whatever. So I think Substack, if it sort of stays in this, we're going to help you discover the things like when you sign up for someone, it gives you the next two or three people that are similar to that. All that helps kind of you find your tribe of people talking about the stuff you're interested in. I do think that if they're careful about sticking to the kind of human curation, there is a future in that. I think it'd be interesting to see how pricing develops because it's got to find its level.
Mm.
I don't know whether everybody will be able to charge. If you pay £10 a month for every single person, you're going to have £100 a month to spend on 10 writers. Fine, so that will work itself out over time. But I think it's good at the moment. It feels like a good antidote
It
to
does.
other ways of kind of discovering journalism and good writing.
I think they've got an interesting challenge ahead, though. I'm trying to work out as a challenge or opportunity, right? So, and I suppose it's the same as Business Insider. These
Mm,
guys, they have a $625 million valuation on the business, last I heard.
mm,
And they're generating about $10 million worth of revenue. So that is a scary multiple, right?
yeah,
And so your ability to return the value to your last investment round at that kind of multiple looks very, very difficult. The only way you're going to be able to return that kind of return on investment for your investor is to sell the company
mm,
to someone who really, really, really wants it. Yeah. Because the growth of revenue isn't going to go 26, 30x. It doesn't feel like to me in a
no,
subscription business model.
yeah, not unless I. Guess there is a kind of So go back to that thought about this kind of machine web, human web, right? Whether there is a kind of flight to and I know
Policy.
that yeah, they would be thinking about if we're kind of if our thing is that we are not pumped full of kind of AI hormones, we're not that kind of site. You never know. You never know how much demand there's going to be for it. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a very good feel for this at the moment, but I don't know whether it is still at the moment a kind of it's something that's just about to tip over into kind of mainstream as a platform. At the moment, it still isn't. I don't think a kind of real genuine like one of the 5 or 6 mainstream platforms for content. So there's a big opportunity for it. You're right. The valuation is punchy, but it's yeah, that happens.
It's the same price as MySpace. We can buy it
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
No, do you think a publisher could buy Substack and keep it pure? I mean, if
Uh,
you're talking about a massive niches, if you wanted to launch the ultimate newsletter business, here is a million newsletters already activated.
yes.
Could that happen? And
Um,
what value would a publisher bring to that?
well, a publisher, do you know what? If you so yes, and a publisher would look at it and think, well, okay, how can I make the packaging and sort of
Mm,
proposition work a bit harder? Um, but at the same time, I think if a publisher bought it, you essentially what it would be is a leap. So publishers, if you think about the publishing model traditionally has been we pay full time writers and we pay some freelance writers, but most of the good writers are kind of on the books. And so we've got a fixed cost business, which we then basically go and sell. The commercial side of the business goes and makes money for it, and if that's how you make your profits. Over the years, more and more of the journalists on the books of the main kind of publishing houses that you know of have either been freelance because they've also wanted to work elsewhere, or they've gradually that kind of fixed amount of staff is coming down as a percentage of the piece. So we've commissioned articles from news
mm,
wires, or we've commissioned articles from other places, and that's the kind of, if you go back to your very original Business Insider point, 70% of the business is subject to volatility. One of the ways that publishers can protect themselves against that is making sure that the input costs of writing are a variable cost. And so they're quickly kind of moved up and down depending on how the advertising market's doing. So for a publisher to buy Substack, in some ways, it's a publisher's dream because it means you've got all of the best writers in the best niches. You're hedged against all kinds of content volatility because whenever a subject becomes interesting, a writer will spring up and be able to kind of write about it. But you don't carry any of the fixed costs. You're not paying their pensions. You don't have to
yeah, you're
worry
a
about all
platform.
the other. Yeah, basically. You're a platform, but you're also a platform that is focused on good writing. So yeah, I think it is. I think it is an interesting opportunity. Could they swallow the valuation? Um, don't know.
About yeah, about as long ago as this bottle of whiskey. The Telegraph had a go at this. Do you remember? The Telegraph created a thing. I can't remember. I think it's called Telegraph Plus or
Mm,
something like that. And the Telegraph said, we're going to create a platform. It was at the time a Blogger. And do you remember Blogger? Google
mm,
ended up buying it. And the idea was, before Twitter, it was we're going to facilitate all of the Telegraph's audience to write on this platform, and we will share all this conversation and we will moderate all the conversation. I remember looking at it at the time, just going, oh, I love this thing. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go and work there. This sounds like the greatest thing ever. This is the
yeah,
democratization of reporting. Everyone's got an opportunity. And if you want to write about MI5, why don't we get someone from MI5 to write it? Like,
yeah,
boom, I get it.
yeah,
I get it. And I remember it ran for a while and I was a part of it and I was writing like furiously these articles all the time. And it died. I mean, it was 25 years ahead of its time. But oh my goodness,
yeah,
it was Substack a quarter century before Substack. And I wonder what the original authors of that now feel when they look at Substack, right? But it feels to me like there's an opportunity to revive that. And if Substack's very, very determined not to have advertising on the platform, wants to be
mm,
monetized by people who genuinely care about it sufficiently to pay a
yeah,
subscription, right? So that shows
yep,
a very high barrier to entry. And if it became ad funded, what you would end up with is people driving traffic. I would be tempted, wouldn't I, to go back and
yeah.
write
Oh yeah,
about those trigger points. So I wonder how long they're going to be able to stay pure and right. By the way, that is the right thing to do if you want to be a great platform. It's not the right thing to do if you've got to try and fix your valuation.
yeah. Well,
This is the
so
challenge, right?
so the only thing that you would say is in valuation terms, if they can show recurring revenue, that is valuable. So if they can show that they're gradually building an ARR kind of base that is
62x. 62x.
I'd said if they can show that it's building, right, and you're showing that
Okay.
basically there's a kind of a predictability about the revenue that you're not kind of subject to the vagaries of the ad market. There is a value in that. 62
I
times
see
is
that.
too high, but but they're scaling at this point, aren't they?
What do you think is a reasonable multiple then? So, the average media company's got a multiple of 3.25 or 3.28 last I saw. right? And if you look at somebody like Snapchat, right, they're operating at a 3.5 times multiple, right?
Yeah.
News Corp, I can't remember what their multiple is, but it's not high. It's not
No.
above five,
No.
right? And so, what do you think? I mean, the tech companies are running at ridiculous multiples, right? So, Google's a $350 billion market revenue business sitting on a $2 trillion market cap, so they're traveling at what 19x or something.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is an achievable acquisition multiple?
Well, sort of for digital 8 to 10.
8 to 10
And then, but
on
most
on on
most
growth.
publishing
Oh,
on
yeah.
growth.
And what growth? What growth? 30% year on year
Yeah, steady. If you're in the
ish.
early stages, yeah. Or early stages, you'd be 2x, 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 2x until
Yeah.
until you get wherever you get to. It's funny that most publishing business are now the big ones are two businesses. Um, the print business actually has a multiple of about one. And people don't. Basically, what that says is that the profit that we're going to make in the year ahead, if we tried to sell that
Yeah.
business, we'd find someone who
Yeah.
would basically give us that money because that was guaranteed and not much else. And we did a
Yeah.
lot of work at Bauer, kind of trying to think about that and think about, well, what did that mean? Did that mean that we could sell some of the assets that we had? And the answer was actually at that multiple, you would make more money running them yourself than you would selling them.
Mm, yeah. It's
Whereas the digital businesses are a completely different kind of because they have future growth kind of baked in.
and what would they multiple at? 5.7.
Yeah, yeah. Which is why publishing business say could a publishing business buy Substack? Well, yes, but it would be at a multiple that was so different from the one that they had internally in terms of their own business, just because of that sort of tension between the two.
Mm, that's tricky because I guess I personally think that I'm a huge fan of Substack. Everybody
Mm,
knows that, and I've spoken to the founders quite a few times and tried to get a sense of where they're headed. They are passionate about creating a massive niches as a new media publishing model, which I absolutely love. I'm
mm,
really hoping that they don't turn out to be the yeah. So I used to surf a lot when I lived in the UK, and I used to drive down to Devon to surf on the weekend and I had a
mm.
combi. And there was me and another guy in a combi. Have I told you this story before? I think I have.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm driving down the motorway, and my combi would do about 40 miles an hour top whack, 60 mile an hour top whack down the M4. And there was another combi that was trying to keep up with me, and it had written on one side, "The early bird gets the worm, right? But the second mouse gets the cheese." And I worry that Substack is an early bird business that's in first, but might not be the winner in this space.
Mm,
And that would be a real shame because there is some serious quality journalism on this platform.
yeah,
And to your point, if I want to know about IVF treatment, like there's going to
yeah,
be a Substack
yeah,
channel about that. If I want to know about, string theory, there's going to be a channel about that. And I found some of the most intelligent coverage of antitrust by former FTC and DOJ lawyers
mm,
in the Substack, better quality journalism on this topic that I care passionately about than I'm
yeah,
finding in the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so that feels to me like it needs to have a future. So how do we
yeah.
support and help that win, do you think?
Well, just to add something else, so there is. We've talked occasionally about this. There is a sort of move towards saying I don't really trust institutions. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I don't trust institutions. I trust individuals, and
Mhm.
that is I'm going to listen to an individual because that's why the last election was a podcast election. It's why there is continuing kind of political volatility everywhere, is because political parties, which traditionally kind of were an institution, don't trust them. Traditional journalism, don't trust that. I trust Joe Rogan and Theo Von and my dad, and it's individuals. And so what Substack is doing, I think, is saying, well, it's we are not affiliated, we are not partisan. You will find a range of
No.
opinions, and actually,
Mm.
most publishers, particularly news publishers, to go back to your point, because they are having to kind of have a positioning in their own market, they do tend. You can point to them and say, "This is center right. This one's kind of far right. This one's more left. This one is really kind of this is woke. This is not. That's they've had to have a positioning, and everything that then happens under that is sort of affected by that positioning. What Substack is really an experiment in for me is saying, what about if it were you could pick the individuals that you trusted, and that's where you got your source from. That's an interesting experiment. You're going to see, I guess, right at the other end of that experiment, the meta kind of uh, machine farm, which is no humans were included in this. This is pure synthetic predictive pattern matching, and that is almost in some ways that the two tensions between those two positions are the challenge for publishing in the next 5 to 10 years. Is how do you make sure that there is more value in individuals with with human curated quality compared to something that engages you for long enough for your ads to be sold.
God, you're smart. You're 100% right. So instead of having a million individual opinions from humans, which is the Substack model, you have a million machine created opinions every second by machine to apply to humans. It's funny, I was having a conversation today with a VC, venture capitalist, somebody
Mm,
that tries to give you money to build something new. They're trying to give me money to build something new, and I don't really want to take money from bankers anymore. I've kind of had my fill of them.
mm,
Um, and so the conversation was, why do you think we've got polarization in the American market? Was the question. I was saying, because we used to have a plurality of opinions, and now we only have two. And the
mm.
machines push you to this end or that end
Yeah.
because that's where it gets the most rage. And that's where you make the most money. Whereas, you'll remember when we were when we were running
Mm,
big media companies in London, you would have the prime minister might be revealing something on page 6, but the deputy, the leader of the opposition, will be writing an opinion story on page 9,
yeah.
and so we had all the views in the newspaper because the newspaper reached 60% of the population of the country. So we had to feed all of the various opinions that the nation had, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't be one. If you were one, then a small niche of people that believed that one view would come to you. But the funny thing is that the technology situation that we've had in the last 20 years, the algorithms have pushed everybody out of the middle to the fringes.
Yeah.
And then you feed this fringe or that fringe. It's like you've pushed everybody and corralled them. It's like they've taken all the sheep out of the field and pushed them with dogs into these two pens, and I'm going to monetize that pen or that pen, right?
Yeah.
And that's led to political polarization, which isn't a good outcome. And so, as I said to this VC today, I said, what we need to do is to fund plurality again. We have to feed the middle, not the middle we were talking about earlier on, the bloated middle, which is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
page views for advertising. I mean, we need to have all the spectrum of opinions to happen. And that's why it feels to me that we should support Substack, because Substack is trying to create a equal voice for all model
Yeah.
without pushing you to any one advertise. Actually, do you know what? Now I think about it, this is an advertising problem. This is all about advertising. Advertising wants all of the people in one place in one shape for the cheapest price, which means you need all the sheep in a pen. Is that about right?
Well, I think ad funded models reward attention, right? Attention. So how much attention can I get? We know extreme emotions, whether that's joy or rage, tend to hold attention. We also know, because there's a lot of studies, on this, that actually negative emotion generates more engagement. Unfortunately, just it's just humans. Negative emotion generates more engagement than positive. So, you will have been in. I mean, God knows how many times I've had this conversation, which is you'll hire someone who is not yet sullied by the world, and they'll be young and super bright, and they'll come in and say, "Do you know what we really should do? Is we should produce a newspaper that only has a site that only has good news." And wouldn't that be great? And all of the, what happens,
Yeah.
all of the grizzled hacks in the room they sort of, their shoulders drop and they go, "Do you know what, kid? No one would read it." And that we've known that for decades. But so
Yeah.
that's exactly what the attention model says. Make me mad. Think of the thumb. I always think of the thumb actually as a kind of the shorter that things got in the way the product made you think about them, you ended up saying you are 100% right, you are 100% wrong,
100% wrong. Yeah,
and
you're right.
that's your kind of sheep in the field. What Substack
God,
can
that
do
is the.
because it's 1,000 word articles, what it can do is say this one, which is, do you know what? It's more complex than that, and that's what I think has been lost out of most of the kind of political debate.
I've had my opinion changed by articles that I've read on Substack because people who know more about it than me have made a case in a coherent fashion that has led to me changing my opinion. And so I'm not a user of any social media really. So I've managed to avoid this uh,
Mm.
the sheepdog. I've avoided the
Yeah.
sheepdog. And so I believe that my opinions should be ascertained by my own personal experience, and I'm willing to be counted for whether my view is right or wrong.
Hmm.
I'm willing to be judged. Yeah. And so when I look at this happening, I think, well, I want to make my own decisions in the world about things this important. I'm not a
Mm.
follower. In fact, I'm not a sheep. I'm not a follower.
Mm.
I would like to be part of the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess is your job as a journalist, right? Is to challenge authority and to
Hmm.
ask the question, is that right or is that wrong? Um, and now Substack for me, other than the subscriptions that I have, and I'll be very open, I
Mm.
subscribe to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, to the Washington Post, to Insider.
Mm.
And I actually spend 4,000 Aussie dollars a year on subscriptions, and my news comes to me, and it's the news that I've selected to help me understand what's going on. But probably, arguably, the single largest publisher that sets my opinion today is Substack.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting.
That feels profound.
Well, does it also it also suggests that, and this is probably the case, that some of those mainstream outlets have sort of, I don't know, they've ended up with a set of opinions which you kind of know what you're going to get. I think one of the elements that Subs does is surprise. You can find something that you weren't expecting to find, or a niche you weren't expecting to be interested in. Whereas I pretty much know if I pick up if I go today and I want to read the New York Times, I want to read the Post, and then I want to read the Guardian, I kind of already know what they're going to say about what happened yesterday because the worldview is quite fixed, and that's maybe something that that will have to get challenged.
There's one other thing that I really want to point out is that when I find someone who is a voice that I'm genuinely interested about them, I can contact them directly and I'll send
Yeah.
them a note and say, I was really interested in this. What do you think? And I will get a response.
Mm.
I wonder if maybe there's a lesson here for news media that we became so aloof that we were unapproachable, right? And so no one ever in all of my years running the world's largest newspaper ever sent me a personal email and just said, hey, can we
Mm.
talk?
Mm.
Ever. So I was clearly not accessible. Whereas if I want to get a hold of somebody that is in the
Mm.
DOJ, that spent 15 years in the DOJ, and I want their opinion, and I send them a message on Substack, I get a response. I wonder if
So,
there's a
so
human piece in that.
well, there is. So we were when we did the Times digital subscriptions. This is going back to 2010. Um, one
It's
of the
about
big
the same time as this whiskey.
it's being made. The
Yeah.
the one of the things we realized was that because everyone was going to be a subscriber, everyone was going to have an identity, and we were clear that no one would be anonymous. And if you wanted to be in the comments section of the Times, it would be under your own name. And we encouraged the writers to join in the comments. And so we had this brief period where, absolutely, as you say, you could read Danny Finkelstein's political column. You could put a comment at the bottom, and he would respond. And so we had
Mm.
these sort of windows where the author would publish it and then basically deal with the audience. And actually some great at the time. It was really good to watch the back and forth, and people were very grateful that people sort of dropped in. You know, some of the journalists were brilliant at it because they're just very good at that off the cuff. Some of them not so much, and you know, that is what it is. But it's interesting then, as if you go back to those comments now, one of the things that struck me at the time was it was a very civil debate compared to what at the time was in social media, where it was, because of the anonymity and the scale, it felt a lot more kind of divisive. I would say now that I think the comment section is much more akin to that. It's a you're 100% wrong, or you're 100% right.
Yeah, I
So
think
that's
that's
just
right.
changed. Just changed over time.
It's changed from a conversation to a shouting match.
Yeah.
So, our I wonder then, we're a bit over time, but
Mm.
we'll wind up. I wonder then if you and I might be something of a kind of wedge, a new approach where look, I I'm more than happy to be judged on my opinions. I just did this on stage in New York, and there
Mm.
were several media CEOs who had some fairly strong opinions on things that I didn't necessarily agree with. I'm actually going to post the entire Scotch and Watch live
Mm.
on Monday, and but I didn't mind. That means that we have animated the industry into action and conversation. That's what we're for. When
Yeah.
were we intending to shout something and go and hide in a box, right? That was never my job. And
Mm.
so I'm more than happy to be judged. And I think sorry, I don't think that's the wrong way of putting it. I would hope that the next generation of media publication, distribution, consumption, and reaction is going to be people saying, I absolutely fundamentally disagree with you because, and then a conversation takes place.
Yeah.
We've gotten to a place where everybody's trying to end the conversation with an expletive. And I don't think that's the best outcome for a conversation amongst humans.
No, I would
Am
agree
I
with you on
dreaming?
that. No,
Am
no,
I
no, no,
dreaming?
no, because no, you're not. So this is this is a point at which, not to get to wax too lyrical about this because I know we're over time, but this is exactly the point at which it is going to become, as we've said, over the next sort of 6 months or so, there are going to be a couple of meta cases. There are going to be a couple of Google things. There is generally a sense, I think, that people are starting to realize that, they are the product, and that sort of rage baiting is part and parcel of, a game that we've all kind of been tricked into with the time spent on smartphones, the time spent kind of being brain frazzled about the world rather than actually living in it. I do sense that there is a kind of a turning point that we're approaching. And when that happens, it sometimes takes a long time for civilization to kind of correct itself. But when it happens as a mass movement. And then suddenly, if it became the case that, spending too much time on your phone or spending too much time being outraged and, all the rest of it was considered socially inept, it'll change quite fast. So I'm quite optimistic about that because I think that what's you've almost kind of boiled the frog up to a point that at some point there will be a point in which people just realize this is a trap that we've fallen into, and when that correction comes, that's when innovation and kind of new platforms and things like this come to the fore. So I'm always optimistic about that.
All right. So I did a podcast last week, which I published a couple of days ago, with a FTC person, a Federal Trade
Mm.
Commission person.
Mm.
And my very opening line to her was, surely antitrust was due 7 or 8 years ago, right?
Mm.
The evidence hasn't changed much since 7, 8 years ago, except to get considerably worse, right?
Mm.
But probably the point of action was 7 or 8 years ago. And she was like 100%. But the political will didn't exist. It took longer for the political will to arrive. So I'm optimistic too. And when was the last time you felt optimistic?
Every morning, Ricky. Every morning.
Oh, really? You're better than me. I feel momentum and
Yeah.
I feel that there's a redress about to happen, and I think that's enormously important. And you and I and other people having this conversation, it's our job to kind of drive that through. And so I'm thrilled that we've reached this position, and
Mm.
let's see if we can return to a plurality of media, which ultimately is a benefit for all, I think. And out of by the way, let me just get the number for you. Oh, here we go. $2.3 trillion of advertising
Mm.
that sits in the world today. There's enough of the $10 billion that the news industry needs to offer a plurality of opinions, and
Yeah.
also for Substack to exist and to win as well. Our problem isn't that the money doesn't exist. Our problem is that monopoly has existed, and
Yeah.
now we're breaking that. So that's how I feel.
Good stuff. That is a great place to finish. Thanks to everyone who joined today. Have a good weekend, all.
Thank you. Cheers. Until next week. All right. Take it easy. Thank you.
Bye bye.